that's what it should be, and that's what Urbit is. Anybody want?
I like to offer usually like a really compacted take on what Urbit is, the project. Most people, I think, at this point are familiar with like what computers are. They could be little clamshell things that you open up and put in your backpack. They could be phones. No one really knows what a computer is, but at the same time, you kind of, have a sense of what a computer is. So usually when introducing the project, I like to tell people that, hey, we're Urbit. We're rethinking what the personal computer is from scratch. Yeah.
I'd say that Urbit is the first NFT. That's it.
That's it? All right, that's it.
Mind blown.
How and why is it the first NFT? Explain. You have 1 minute to explain.
I'll pass it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, it just is the first NFT. Like, it's the...
Literally.
So, NFTs are about ownership, right? Sure. And so, now it's seen as this thing like, oh, you own a JPEG, and that's it. But really, the core of it is that you can save JPEGs, and it doesn't... No one really cares, right? It's not the actual JPEG that you care about. It's the ownership, right? And that's why these things like you can have different attributes on NFTs, right? And they would make these things be worth more or less. Urbit actually has functionality behind it, right? And it was made way before Ethereum even existed or was even an idea, right? I think like Bitcoin came out in 2009, and the first blog post about Urbit came out in 2009, but Curtis had been working on it for what, 7, 8 years before that, right?
Yeah, I've heard like 2002, 2003.
Right, so he's like, that's way before our NFTs were, well, most of the people even bought NFTs were like even born, and so it really is like the first, like sigils, right? Sigils are unique, they are generated from numbers, and they are JPEGs. First NFT.
That's solid.
So I think there's one of two ways we could take it. We could take the NFT conversation and segue into Urbit for artists, or I could be annoying and ask about, you're reconceptualizing the personal computer. Let's talk about hardware. Which one up to? All right, let's do both. Let's merge the question.
Or should we get the two of us on this?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get into this from a technical POV, but I'm just going to try to skim if I can. When we talk about Urbit being a computer, a lot of people like to immediately jump to that. Oh, but it's not a phone, it's not a laptop, sort of argument, which is it's valid. In a way, you can kind of think that we're unpacking this sort of in reverse. Given that software and sort of manifesting software from scratch is cheap, we're working from this sort of like virtual layer where we're starting with software and sort of crystallizing slowly. Like the ice is getting colder. It's turning into ice. The water is turning into ice, I should say. And in a way, we're sort of working from this very fluid software environment into something that is way more compact and crystallized in the form of eventually, ideally, a software manifestation of what Urbit could be, which we actually have people in the community already working on this. So it's not far-fetched or wildly out there or anything. So yeah, I mean, the hope for a lot of people in the community is that one day we won't have to rely on laptops, phones, built by Apple or Google or whatever, and maybe one day we'll have a really nice, beautiful, hardware stack to call our own.
So I think there's a difference between like talking about Urbit on hardware, like knock on hardware, right? And just like having Urbit devices that maybe don't, they don't even, like maybe they don't run Urbit, right? Maybe they just, because you can go on your browser, you can go on your phone and interact with your Urbit. And so like things like mobile apps that run on your Urbit, but like you just use on your phone, but your phone doesn't run it, like that's possible now. So like one of my big like year-long things has been, like I really want to write a guitar tablature editor on Urbit, right? And I've been thinking about this for a long time, but the tech, like the software stack, hasn't really been up to par to do that. Like, and it's really an interface thing too, right? We don't have like our backend is there. You can do all of this stuff, but you don't have when you don't have the UI capabilities to like really easily do this, then it becomes a hard problem. And so one of the things that I really would like to see is Urbit sort of going hard on native UI stuff, which you can talk a lot about, like the holy grail UI stuff. I think that's going to be the next level for Urbit. But like, think about just being able to edit sheet music, right? Like doing that and then sharing that with everyone else, like your entire, I don't know, what do you call like an orchestra? Everyone would be able to immediately see like what you're working on, the changes you've made. You would have a full versioned history of things. Like all those things have primitives on Urbit. And the networking is basically there. You don't have to do anything. Like most sheet music apps are just standalone apps, right? They don't communicate with anyone else's app, like Sibelius, right? That is a good example, or Finale, right? They don't really have like any networking capabilities because it's hard to build networking capabilities into apps. But with Urbit, it's like you get it immediately, and that's crazy, right? Like you don't have to think about it. Like one of the first apps that I wrote was the flashcard app, right? SRS, and it was trivial to build in networking there, right? Like all I had to do was add a couple extra lines of code, and then all of a sudden I can send different flashcard decks to other people, and they can pull it from mine. And it's like,
what do you mean by a networking layer?
Just like the way that Urbits connect to each other, right?
Yeah.
Like it already exists, Like you boot up your Urbit, and now you're connected, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it not only exists like at that just basic level, it exists at the app level, right? So like remember in like the Hoon workshop, right? When the end of it, Neil started talking about sending pokes to different ships, right? Well, like poking a different ship from an app is trivial, right? Like you just send a card, and that's it. That doesn't exist in other languages, right? The closest is maybe like Elixir, right? Like you could kind of have the idea of networking built in there, but you don't get this global network. You don't get an identity with it, right? Like you have to kind of still write a significant amount of code to make apps work together.
Right.
And there's no single platform that they run on, so like the Erlang VM, right? That's what Elixir stuff. Like that doesn't exist on everyone's machine. They'd have to go and download that, and But
So you're saying for any app, like a music creation app, like some people use Sibelius, an Urbit
Yeah.
version of that, you can have that.
oh, it's Sibelius. I was pronouncing it like syphilis.
But, you can have that, but like it'll be automatically networked with all the other peers who might want to be using that.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
wouldn't be true just for that app, but that could be true for anything. That could be true for a notebooks, writing,
Yeah.
app, blogs.
And not even just for the same app, right? And that's the craziest
All
part
the
is that
apps
like,
would be networked together.
right? So like if you set up like say a chat room, right? Like kind of like a Discord chat room or whatever, but on Urbit, right? You could basically set it up for your entire orchestra, and then when you make changes to your app or to your sheet music, right? You could customize it to say, oh, hey, I want to like send notifications to these people to say like this part has changed, like go and practice it or whatever, right? Like there's a lot you can do here that you can start thinking about a lot more carefully now because all the other cruft is gone, right? Like you don't have to waste hundreds and hundreds of man hours building network primitives.
Right.
And also like all of the file system stuff, right? You don't have to think about that. You don't have to think about like, say, concurrency issues, right? Like it's not a big deal anymore because you're not building an app for thousands of people using at the same time. You're building an app so that everyone can have it on their own machine and use their own CPU to do stuff. And so you don't have to think about like scaling issues and things like that. It's so much, right?
The setup concerns are completely different. Completely different, yeah. Yeah, anything else, or shall we? Anything else you wanted to dig into?
Well, yeah, just what I just like thinking about too is just like, okay, it's better in that it's peer-to-peer, and then it's better in that like today you're using like whatever, all these 20, 30 different apps that all do similar things. Facebook does something similar to Twitter, does something, you can do video chats on these things, you can do blogging on these things, but this can all be immensely simplified when you have this system, which is like, as you said, you have these different apps that can, talk to each other because they're all, I don't know what the word is, but sort of baked into a peer-to-peer network.
So how are you guys incentivizing apps to move to Urbit?
Well, I mean, software distribution, right? I kind of don't like the idea of like, oh, how do we get people to build apps and oh, you just get them first, right?
Right.
It doesn't work super well unless you're DeFi or something, and then everyone just tries to make money off of you. It seems kind of like that's not what a creator economy really want, right? I think the problem with like artists there, a problem that NFTs introduce, right, is that artists kind of don't want to work in a system that is just about making a lot of money, right? I mean, I've noticed it. Like every time I've asked like one of my artist friends in Urbit to draw me an NFT, they're like, no, I don't want to get involved in that. And I think that's a huge problem because like right now, artists are more valuable than programmers, right? Like, and that's crazy. I don't think that's ever been the case. You can really get like a sort of patron sort of system again, right? With this sort of stuff, because you can basically just hire an artist to make you millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's the generative art stuff, right? It requires art. It's not just like yeah, you need something for sure. Like because I've been thinking about NFTs a lot, obviously, and
Yeah.
been trying to like build my own, and I can't because I can't draw. And it's,
Right.
it's kind of a unique situation. And so if you can have a thing that like makes it easier for artists to like get in on it, right, without being all about money, I think that's like probably the biggest incentive you get for Urbit. And I feel like we're doing that with software distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we be using this? I'm actually not sure.
Really, it sounds kind of fake.
How are we with sound?
Seems like a
Does it
conch
matter
sound.
whether we're holding the mic or not? Just how is it with sound? Does it matter whether we hold the mic or not, or we should talk to the mic?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. There is a whole realm of concerns around sort of like the sort of social elements of just getting artists to work with people who have money, people who can develop systems in the form that Jake described. I think when we look at the actual set of organizational affordances that the Urbit Foundation offers, there's a grants program that has existed for a while, which interestingly enough, offers up Urbit, Urbit sort of space itself, which has long been characterized as land. It's one way of looking at it, but it's funny because there isn't a direct monetary sort of pay relationship there where, I'm doing an Urbit Foundation grant and I get $200. It's more, I guess, you're sort of being granted like a sort of like tract of the greater networking space, which is really interesting to sort of bring up. So their Urbit grants exist. They have been one way that we've been.
This is two different questions. So there's adding to your ecosystem, and getting different kinds of apps, which obviously Tlon can't build each and every. You want other people to come in, and then there's getting artists. I wouldn't necessarily call people who are, I wouldn't call engineers artists in the sense of that we're talking about it in this panel. So bringing in artists is a different question. I think the question with bringing artists is what kind of artists, why do you want them, what are they doing, and then probably how do you incentivize them is the least interesting question. Why should they be there? What does it mean to try to attract artists to Urbit?
Yeah, I have a bit of a sort of like historic context here, which is funny to bring up, where, in these sort of like early days of the internet, you had people who sort of tried scratching out their own ideals of what art could be in the network, and it was always like very primitive. And yet there's like this really cool lineage where if you follow that long enough, you kind of like get around from like very, very early internet artists who just kind of were messing around on AOL and stuff. Then you have sort of people who started making their own blogs and little collectives in the form of surf clubs, which is like people who, were surfing the web, the primitive web back when it existed, accumulated sort of like the flotsam out there and just try to, cobble something up. And then you get increasingly into, more contemporary like outfits that are kind of more advanced, institutional friendly versions of this like Dis magazine. You get like K-Hole as a part of this kind of like loose collective that emerged at around that same time in the early thousands. There's just, I guess like the thing that I'm trying to point to is that I almost worry less from a sort of like Tlon and Urbit like institutional perspective of building out sort of, hey, here artists, come all, here's the place to do art. I think in a very real way, artists will sort of find their own way, which is kind of a cop-out answer. But I feel like if you build out a space that is compelling in terms of like what one can do or sort of how one can make it malleable to their own interests, you'll almost find the people who already we begin to see on the network, weirdos, musicians, people they're just trying to use the primitives of Urbit to like their own ends, which is kind of cool. So the fact that it's already happening in a bit of a small kind of nascent way is kind of beckoning to the fact that we might be it's sort of like you introduce like a little bit of mold and it just kind of like starts growing. I think that's kind of like the hope from where I'm coming from, at least.
Let me piggyback off that, and sort of instead of answering why or how Urbit would need artists, can answer like why artists need Urbit. Like all these big platforms where artists are found, like Spotify or whatever, they sort of mask themselves as distributors. But in a way, they're really producers. They're producing what kind of art we actually see, right? People are now pressured to make songs that are 2 minutes or less because they know that people are more likely to listen 30 seconds into a song that's 2 minutes or less. And once you get past 30 seconds, that's when you start getting money. So like in that case, Spotify is really determining the sort of art that gets made. You see the same thing with YouTube. People know that if they make this really shocked face on the thumbnail, that literally that's going to boost their revenue. So now YouTube is like producing a whole tranche of people who make this ridiculous face. Like it's awful. And
also, it's like the library stuff, right? Like that has been completely de-emphasized, right? Like Spotify, your library is just the things you've like favorited, right? Which is weird. Like it should be like more curative, right? Like,
yes.
And I think that's an area that Urbit can really be successful.
Right. So there's this like.
Own everything,
right. And so we already have, I don't know if people have heard of it, but there's this 1,000 true fans model, right? Which is like if you want to be a successful artist or a successful creator, you don't need 1 million fans, you need 1,000 real fans who will just pay you $6, $7 a month. Then you're making good bank, it's fine. And so we already have a version of this, but actually like when you're using this on the corporate internet, like your fans aren't really your fans, they're the platform's fans. They're Patreon's fans, they're YouTube's fans, right? Because those systems are the ones that are in control. But when you have a 1,000 true fans model that's actually peer-to-peer, with genuine peer-to-peer payments, genuine peer-to-peer subscriptions, then suddenly you can have a human-centered, flourishing, artistic community again.
So what does that like practically, what does that look like on Urbit? Is there an example? It looks like okay.
We need a Bandcamp. It doesn't exist yet.
Okay.
But it's like we just released software distribution 2 weeks ago, right? Like it's, and we already have like what 10 apps out. I mean, it's crazy.
We can bring Mike over here. There's a bit of an answer here. So Jake was just mentioning that, you just need the sort of network primitives in the form of, interfaces. Bandcamp is a great example that does not yet exist on Urbit, but it very well could be now that we have software distribution online. Anyone can tap into that energy and just sort of build their own thing. You kind of do see this existing within the existing affordances that we provide in the form of Urbit's groups, which is an app structure that basically allows the formation of communities using a very normative pattern in the form of channels. We've already been finding that people have been able to sort of rally together now that sort of more value is being attributed to some of the more speculative yet very utility-driven assets like stars. You kind of get people who are already being like, oh yeah, well let's build what is it called, SoulSeek? Yeah. People are trying to build like their own like P2P like song sharing networks, which is cool because you begin to see like this little productive engine of just people who are like, yeah, I have an idea, I want to rally around something, let's just do it. So the sort of getting the communication infrastructure there was, I think, one of our theses in terms of like, well, how do you get people sort of like in the mix immediately and just talking to one another, which is kind of like that baseline. And we're already beginning to see sort of fruit born from that approach.
Yeah, I mean, like I used DC++ back in the day, which was like a chat room, like IRC kind of, but you would also have, like everyone would share a set of files. And people like really curated this. So like I was in a guitar DC++ room, and one guy had just every single Young Guitar magazine, which is this Japanese guitarist magazine that's been around since like the 50s. think. Maybe the 80s, I don't know. But anyway, he had tons and tons of scans of this. And I just downloaded every single one at like 50 kilobytes a second, and it was amazing. Like, it was the best thing ever. But it took me like 10 days. And that stuff doesn't really exist anymore. It's kind of like no one curates anything because everything is like streamable on platforms that don't really want you there. You know, like they don't want you the sort of guy who wants to download stuff on their platform. And so they like just make it so that you have a lot of trouble using it like you use, say, Winamp, right? And so I really feel like if we give people the opportunity to use this stuff like I used to use DC++ or people used to use LimeWire, right? Like, then you get this like mass of people who will do it for free, you know? Like, there's no, and then once there are enough people doing it for free, then people can figure out how to make money on it. And I don't think it would be that hard. Like, I think most of us aren't really worried about, you know, people being able to make money on Urbit. I mean, NFTs made it really apparent that you can make a lot of money on this stuff. So I feel like people would just be more creative.
I mean, why? So you know, that's another great segue. Why use Urbit instead of NFTs?
I don't even think that's a valid question, actually. Because
Really?
you can have NFTs on your Urbit. I mean, it's like you can use both. Like, I think, I hate that I'm becoming this like NFT person.
Own it, bro.
Really, like, it's the problem right now with NFTs is that you don't like, even though you own them, you don't have the sense of ownership as much, right? Like, where do you put all these things, right? They're on like things like OpenSea, right? You can go to your profile on OpenSea and see them. That's, well, yes, okay. Yes. Like, I mean, so right now we have, like, Urbit connects to the Ethereum network, right? So that's how it makes sure that, like, you know, your Urbit ID is yours. And so it constantly talks to it to tell it, oh yeah, have any other ships around me, like, updated their, you know, owners or whatever, and then they change based on that information. You can do the exact same thing with any NFT that your address owns, right? So as long as you have like NFTs in the same address that, say, your Urbit is tied to, then you can literally just pull in everything, all the data about that NFT, just pull it into your Urbit easily. And I think this is a thing that people miss about, say, things like MetaMask and Rainbow Wallet, right? For example, like Rainbow Wallet, it looks like it's sort of in your wallet, right? But Rainbow Wallet is like just an app on your phone. You can't use it everywhere. You don't have anything else that can interface with it. But like Urbit could have something like a wallet, like an NFT store that you can then use in other apps, like just pull from the NFT store or whatever and use it in a game or like a platformer or something like that.
I can actually directly extend this conversation. So I think one of the things that a lot of people at Tlon, certainly myself, have sort of levied as a bit of an argument against the sort of wallet-centric model of a lot of Web3 stuff is that, you know, when you have assets, NFTs, you know, ERC20s, 721s, whatever, inside of a wallet, it's kind of like a trophy case. You know, it's inert. This thing is sort of like this box that you set things into that you own, but sort of just gather dust, you know, in a way. You can't really do much with them. And one of the sort of exciting aspects about Urbit is because the thing is a live computer, you know, Turing complete, whatever. It's a general purpose computer. It can do whatever you want it to do. You know, there's a lot more of a sort of impetus or a sort of like means of being able to make what would otherwise be inert sort of, you know, tokens or whatever, points of ownership live. A fun example of this was making it such that, you know, if you have your Urbit, which is nominally a wallet, when you get into its technical underlay, you know, you could do much more exciting things like turn an NFT that you downloaded of like a fish or something into a sticker. You know, right now with Discord, there are stickers. Discord owns everything because you just sort of upload it all and it ends up on their servers. The cool thing about Urbit is that, you know, if you own NFTs, they're all yours, both from like an ownership point of view, but the things also like live on your personal server, which is wild.
Well, like, think about like remixes, right? Like, you could literally make money on remixes, maybe, right? Because you can have if you buy like music as NFTs, right? And you put them, like, they're in your store, then that maybe could give you permission to, like, you know, mix something that like SoundCloud doesn't have any way to do this, right? You just kind of do it in the hope that no one cares. But then a lot of people, you know, get sued because of this, right? But if if you have a way to interface with the things that you buy on the internet, and those those things have like verifiable ownership, right? Then you can do things that normally wouldn't be possible without like a full team of lawyers. And I think that's really where Urbit can shine, because it's you can have like DAWs, right, on Urbit that won't work on songs that you don't own, right? And that could be very cool, because then people would want people to remix stuff, right? Because that would force them to buy the song. But people now won't do that because they can just stream it from Spotify, and it's like,
I'll just add something real quick. So like, I have a friend, musician, and he like, he left the music industry because he was so disgusted 10 years ago, but now he's getting really back into making music because of the idea of NFTs, right? But okay, that's fantastic, but then there's everything else. There's like, how do you organize your community, right? Like, are you going to use a centralized server for that, or are you going to do that in a peer-to-peer way? So, it's like, Urbit is an NFT, but it's also a computer, The NFT to NFTs.
Is it a primitive metaverse versus an NFT? I mean, I feel like that track. Okay, it's an NFT and it's the metaverse. Okay.
You're right. That's recursively defined. Yeah. It's an NFT that unlocks a new metaverse. How do you guys feel about that?
A parallel metaverse.
That's okay. All right, but yeah.
So we've talked a lot about music. I guess I really want to ask, like, what kinds of communities exist on Urbit right now? What are you seeing people doing? And I think we've done a lot on music. What else though? Who else is there?
Yeah, I'll just throw out a couple things. There's the Internet Weirdness Task Force, which I believe. I'm writing a little book on Urbit. Let me just pass it over.
Yeah, we already have a sort of casual soul-seek-like community. Again, that's music. Not going to get into that though. We have, from this dude runs. I'm sure we're going to get into it, but an amazing developer community, which is huge. A lot of our own sort of like day-to-day work is handled here through a variety of different groups. I've also been trying to set up like a sort of distributed design workshop, so people who are interested in developing or extending the Urbit universe of what it means to build P2P apps and whatever. That's something that I'm also organizing on the side as well.
Yeah, I think you guys talked about the kind of more popular ones. I'll try to talk about the like lesser known ones. There's one made by my friend actually, the Volcano Hermit, which is really, really interesting because he builds stuff just in his lab in Oregon somewhere. And I think he's literally building his lab right now. And he made this one really interesting sort of retro gaming console that he's trying to load up with Urbit. You could then just like download ROMs through Urbit. And so I think it's called full bootstrapping solutions, something like this. And it's really, really interesting. And he's just one guy, right? Like, it's not a whole community of people. It's just this guy doing things. And a lot of people have been really supportive of him, which is cool to see, because these things don't get anywhere if you don't have like a community that's willing to like chip in. And I think one really cool thing is he set up his Bitcoin wallet and people just started sending him Bitcoin. I know, like it's so cool because it's like that working on this. And so, yeah, it's like that sort of Patreon style thing, but a lot more primitive, I guess, right? Where it's not, you don't have to like sell yourself so much. You just like do things, right? And then people can just see how you're doing those things, and they can choose to give you money or not.
Like, I guess what we haven't quite said is that like a lot of what's great on Urbit is just like communities, right? It's communities of people chatting, and it's just like, I've been like just kind of a fly on the wall in all these different communities, and I've learned so much. Like, and I think that's the way Urbit has been most valuable to me personally. And so that's just like an equivalent of, okay, whatever, like a Telegram group chat or a Signal group chat, but better, and where all the cool people are.
So, how are we doing on time? I don't even know what time it is. It's 2:20. So how much longer do we have? All right, maybe we throw it out to the. I might not be able to stay the whole half hour. Maybe throw it out to the audience if anyone has questions.
Hello. Maybe you guys can expand on how you bring NFTs into Urbit, because like NFTs have a lot of issues with like where the data is actually stored, and if it's on IPFS or Arweave or on someone's personal server. There's some like new ones that are storing the data fully on chain, but you can't do that much with it. So I'm just like curious about storage in Urbit, and then how like even if you brought an NFT in, what if like it's gone and you just have this hash, and I don't know. Long-term thinking as well. Yeah.
Well, so there's stuff like Urbit LLMs, right, which isn't complete yet, but it's a way to sort of have a file server on Urbit. I think the problem here is that things like storage are always going to rely on the reputation of the person who's storing it, right? So right now, that reputation is sort of the person who created, or the company that created the NFT. If that changes to where like the Urbit that kind of serves the NFT, then right? I mean, this is not a technical answer, right? This is like a social answer. I think that combined with some sort of affordances to actually make this possible, the sort of social ones can paper over the rough edges that you can't really have right now with NFTs in the way they're stored, right? Because there's no social component to IPFS, right? There's no social component to like Ethereum itself. There's just these discords, right? So you just have to trust a discord, and that just feels weird, right? Because that discord can just shut down. Like one thing, there was this this NFT called Thick Pokemon, right? Like THICC. It was literally just Pokemon cards, but every Pokemon had a thick ass, right? So I tried to find these just to show someone because I thought it was hilarious, and they're gone. They're not on OpenSea anymore. There's some semblance of rarity or whatever, but they're pretty much gone. And people spent $500 to $1,000 to $6,000 on these things, and they're now just you can't find them anywhere. And that's a huge problem. But I just don't think it will be as common if you host these things on Urbit, because they'll be connected to your PAT-P, connected to your, especially if it's a star, right? Then that star is tainted, right? If it is just destroying thousands of dollars, like no one's going to want to interact with it. You can kind of strap a sort of reputational system. Really simple, in the same way of storage. Maybe it is still just IPFS, but it's like connected to Urbit somehow. And the added social layer sort of reputation to it. Yeah, I think I don't know how to do this.
I'll be the designated mic passer. Why not?
Well, speaking of NFT hosting, it seems like the problem with the NFT is fundamentally a hosting issue, right? And the fact that Urbit gives you these solutions to self-host at right now your own internet node, it seems like the natural integration is to transfer NFTs onto people's associated with the Urbit IDs. And since you already have a self-hosting solution, you simply write a new NFT wallet app, like how we're getting the Bitcoin wallet apps working. And so you now have the NFT attached to this NFT wallet app that serves NFTs universally, because they're all just files at the end of the day, right? So you can just have an NFT wallet that serves files, you self-host it, and it's not an extra burden because you're already self-hosting. But you've already solved the hosting problem, so now you might as well self-host your own NFTs, and it remains, social in the way that NFTs are. That's just what I was thinking. So I do think Urbit solves the NFT problem for good, basically.
So there's the Gora app that came out recently. I don't know. Have you installed it yet?
I have, yeah.
Did it work for you? Because it didn't work for me. It did. Wow, really? Okay.
No, I have a
So-
nice shiny little proof of attendance coin associated with my Urbit.
Yeah. So like that's it. We have it.
Yeah, it's pretty magical.
So I think the proof of attendance coin is like is it just an image? Is it hosted anywhere?
Yeah,
Is it?
it's literally an image. I think to Ryan's original question, there's almost always going to be the issue of having to deal with whenever an Urbit breaches or goes down. It's kind of a sort of immutable fact of networking in general that I don't know if we'll ever necessarily solve, but it's worth noting that there is a sort of wealth of ways that this could be federated, repeated across the network to others.
But if you own the NFT, right? Like why
Yeah.
not just host it, right?
Yeah,
You know,
of
there's no
course.
reason why you should ping an API server that image.
Absolutely, yeah.
Image, just post it yourself. Anyone who wants to see it will have to ping your ship, and if you lose it, then you lose it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's your problem.
No, I mean, it
It's
seems...
the fundamental thing about ownership, right? It's like
Yeah.
you now have the ability to destroy it, and so it's a powerful ability, but that's it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions from the audience?
I mean, are there any more questions from the couch? Or is there anything that you guys really wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
What was the title of this talk again?
Nobody knows.
Mars Rising.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. You got another question.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Would Urbit be open to securitization in the future? Because one of the catalysts of the recent drive up for Bitcoin is the approval of a Bitcoin futures ETF and the beginning of the 75 approval wave for Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, a Bitcoin ETF proper, where you can buy Bitcoin and redeem it out of the ETF, but also just trade it and own it in 401ks. Would Urbit ever have, say, Urbit Planet Trust or Urbit Star Trust?
Well,
That's a fantastic question, I
I mean,
think.
that's
But I don't.
the rap star stuff.
Yeah, I mean, about that.
I don't know how much we're supposed to talk about that. Like, it's not a.
Are you guys hiring consultants?
Yeah, I think let's talk, let's chill. I don't know. That's my answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's the rap star project, right? I think it's coming out soon.
Yeah, you can just describe it.
I don't really know a lot about it, but it's an ERC20 token that's basically just going to fractionalize stars, and so you can basically buy a fraction of a star whenever you. Rap star is one token, right? Or one star, and so you can basically just receive star from the star trust when you have one rap star. But and it's like we decided to planets because the stars are the things that more value. Well, every one of these things hold. It's just the idea.
Fungible.
Yeah, exactly. Realization of these things. How else are you going a piece of the network when a piece of the network costs like $300,000? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Well,
Like wrap up a star, make it fungible so that you could use fractions of it as sort of a method of payment.
I think when it becomes a problem, Urbit has already succeeded. So
That's a good point. I mean, the other fork of a
then, and then it just gets those things get really valuable.
yeah. Well, I mean, just to complete that thought, so you have that one financialization route of fractionalization, which makes the whole project a lot more liquid, which could be interesting. The other fork is sort of the sort of true and tried, make use of what the land is that a star represents, or build interesting services on it, be a node provider, be an S3 provider. There are like a lot of routes here to sort of building value, and I don't think the sort of like inertness of a wrapped star isn't so much a problem right now. Not yet, at least.
I don't know. Maybe in the future, like we can figure out a way to still keep a star running while also have it be in the vault, right?
Yeah, maybe someday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not, right? Like it's. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know- I
it's
mean-
something that like we really have to think about.
I know that there are a few DAOs who are already doing multi-sig ownership over individual stars that are beginning to experiment with this. So I can't really speak to that. I just know that it's an active conversation.
Yeah. Like what he's saying basically is just
Exactly, yeah.
I think secretly hope no one's watching the live stream because I.
Oh, come on. It's all been fantastic.
I mean, I think I actually have to get going.
All right.
But this gentleman and the gentleman I think would make a great placement.
Does anyone want to join as the MC?
Yeah, I'm nominating you. I have to.
Hello.
Let's introduce yourself. Who are you? Let's all.
Hi, I'm Radlux Hobmus on the network.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Do you have any questions for us? Or is there anything you want to talk about?
I'm not really an MC type. Can you come back?
We can ask you questions maybe.
Hi.
What's your favorite color? What's
The
your
color
sign?
of money. I'm a Leo. I'm not.
No, is anyone in the in?
Let me thank Anne and Kate and Trevor, who are absolute superstars, for hosting this fantastic film festival and for providing us the space. Thanks to you, Rachel, for doing all the technical stuff. That's all I have.
Yeah, again, likewise, thanks. I don't know if we're wrapping it up here. If anyone in the crowd is interested in coming up here and chatting, asking questions, we're here. Otherwise, we can just banter. Or cut it.
Thanks for coming out. There's a party here later tonight.